What's up, my wizards? It's Deb. From Mtg, we like magic, and the deck I'm going to show you today is all of the good things. This deck is unique. Bet you haven't seen a deck like this around this season, and it's rotation-proof, so you're not going to lose any pieces in a couple of months and have to build a whole new deck. But, best part, it's only $5, all commons and uncommons, and I've actually been raking in wins with this thing on Arena, so I bumped it up the schedule and decided to go ahead and show it to you. Here's Mono Black Burn. Now, I know that most burn decks are usually red, but if you really want to incinerate something until it's a hockey puck, you got to cook it until it's black. Red is still way too rare, but this deck is, wait for it, well done. But a chain, we've actually reached a critical mass of black cards in Standard that can burn the opponent. But the unique thing about black burn is that most of it is on bodies, so it's actually cool. It gives our burn a way to affect the board, and we can still attack into slower or more control-y decks and block more aggressive decks to give us more time to find more burn against them. So we've actually got a pretty interesting game plan as far as burn decks go. It all comes together really nicely, especially for under $5. So let me show you what we're doing here. Now, the deck has 22 creatures in it, and all of them can, in some form or fashion, hit the opponent for damage or life loss without ever actually having to attack. But they can attack if you want them to. Case in point, we're going to play 4 copies of Vicious Conquistador to start things off here, because this is a pretty aggressive 1-drop. It's effectively a 2-power 1-drop whenever it swings in, and it's guaranteed damage when it swings in, which is important for this deck, because sometimes you'll swing in a Conquistador or two, knowing that they're going to die, but you'll get the damage regardless. Plus, we're trying to pile on 20 damage in a burn deck that doesn't have access to premium burn, you know? We don't get to play Lightning Bolt or even like Wizard's Lightning in our burn deck, so every little bit of damage counts, and early damage can be an especially vital part of this game plan to make sure that we can actually cross the finish line later in the game. Sometimes a swing or two free with a Vicious Conquistador in the early turns can make all of the difference. Plus, last thing, this is a vampire. That matters for 1 card in the deck, but it matters a lot for 1 card in the deck, so I should point that out. But speaking of vampires, by the way, we're also going to play 2 copies of Vampire Neonate down here at the 1-drop slot. This has been sort of an unexpected, maybe, all-star in Core Set Sealed this season, and it translates well to this deck for all the reasons that it's good in that format. Basically, it's a 1-drop that's relevant pretty much all game. It can pressure your opponent without having to attack. It acts as a mana sink, so you can actually spend your mana if you have no other way of spending it in a given turn. That's kind of nice. And if nothing else, it's a wall of roots. You know, it's a 1-mana 0/3 that blocks all day, especially in the early game, which is pretty important to this deck too. So it survives shock and magma spray, you know. Other than Fatal Push, they're usually going to have to spend more mana removing this than you actually spent for it. So it's mana value in a way. It's kind of tempo in that way. I ended up liking a lot of things about Vampire Neonate. It's not the best 1-drop in the world or anything, but it's not often that you find a common 1-drop with an activated ability that actually is really relevant all the way through the game. It's not a horrible top deck, you know. There are going to be some games where you just need a couple of points of damage to finish a game off, and top decking a Vampire Neonate is not such a bad thing. So I actually ended up liking this card a lot, and I should repeat at least one more time that vampires matter, so there's that too. Now, we're going to play 4 copies of Tattered Mummy in the deck, too. I found this card to be really cool. You know, I wish it had an extra power, but aside from that, the gripes kind of end, you know? We're looking to just block in this deck anyway. I don't know if you've noticed, like, Vicious Conquistador is one of the most aggressive creatures that we're playing. For the most part, we're looking to just get value, get damage off of our Into the Battlefield triggers or dies triggers in this case, but also block the opponent's creatures so that we don't die in the meantime. And Tattered Mummy is really good for that. It's a great disposable blocker. This allows us to stop incoming damage at least one time from an opposing attacker while still doing what this deck wants to do. You know, the primary goal here is to bust him in the chops for damage. This allows us to do that while still playing a body that's going to soak up some damage against attackers or get in some damage by going sideways against control decks and other decks that don't play so many creatures. So this is versatile in a way. It does everything we need to, and it's especially good against decks that don't have a lot of exile removal. You know, decks with Fatal Pushes and Shocks and Lightning Strikes and stuff. If they want to actually remove it outside of combat for whatever reason, they're going to have to take some damage for that. And it's really good in multiples, too. You know, a couple of Tattered Mummies is going to do 4 damage at the very least over the course of a game for you just by blocking. So Tattered Mummy actually turned out to be pretty good for, again, stacking up that total 20 damage in a game. Now, we're also playing 4 copies of Skymarch Bloodletter in the deck, and the burn doesn't seem like much on this, you know. They take a point, you get a point back. It's not a whole lot to write home about, but the burn actually isn't the most important part of this card. It's there, and as discussed earlier, every little bit counts, but the important part of this card is the flyer. Flyers are really relevant to our game plan, and I know this is the first one I've shown you, but we're actually playing 12 flyers in the deck. That's important, and I really should point it out, because some of the time, a lot of the time actually, you'll get them burned down to like 7 or 9, and you got to finish them off somehow, and having a gang of flying creatures is a great way to do that, so Skymarch Bloodletter is actually a relevant part of our game plan. As a matter of fact, every creature I show you in the deck from here on out is going to be a flying creature, including the next one, which is my favorite creature in the deck, and I knew I'd like him. And as a matter of fact, part of the reason I made this deck was in an effort to play this creature, and I am not unhappy with the results. We actually ended up with 4 full copies of Fell Spectre in the deck, not to be confused with Phil Spector, famed music producer turned convicted murderer who comes to court looking like this, but that has nothing to do with the card. I just always think of Phil Spector when I see Fell Spectre. So I had to get that out of my brain and put it on the internet. But in any case, Fell Spectre is not bad. It's like a mini Nicol Bolas, you know. It's a 4-mana flyer that rips a card out of their hand when it enters the battlefield, and that's one of the whole reasons that Nicol Bolas is good. This might not be as fat as Bolas, but we do get more advantage later on if we're able to rip more cards out of their hand while this thing's in play, and they're really good in multiples. Like Fell Spectre into Fell Spectre ends up doing 6 damage for you in total and ripping your entire opponent's hand out of the hand. So this thing actually ended up being pretty good. It's not going to get all the damage for you in the air that you might want, you know, 2 or 3 points over a game, but if you can make them discard more than the number of cards they had to discard when it entered the battlefield, you're just doing a bunch of damage. This is effectively functioning as a Megrim for you, which isn't bad. Plus it's on a flying body. That's not bad either, with a pretty sweet into the battlefield trigger. I've liked this thing since the first time I saw it, really wanted to play with it, and I still like it even having played with it. That shows you it's pretty decent. But let's finish off the creatures here with another insane uncommon that might actually be like serious big boy constructed playable, and that's Vampire Sovereign. This thing has been really, really good in playtesting. If you squint really hard, it's kind of a Siege Rhino. It costs 1 more mana, it's a little bit smaller, but at least they slap the flying on it, but it's got the exact same enter the battlefield trigger, and Siege Rhino was a stupid, ridiculous card. I'm not saying that this is, but it's a great way to like put a pretty fat, evasive body on the battlefield at the top of your curve, gain a little bit of life back and get back in the game if you need to, while also dealing a fair amount of burn to your opponent. 3 damage is really no joke, especially when it comes on a desirable body. Sovereign has been really good in playtesting, and sometimes this can swing a game by itself. This can turn the corner for you in some cases. And if air traffic control clears it, then it can get through a bunch of damage in a game. You know, not only the 3 when it enters the battlefield, but if it gets in 1 swing during the attack step open, that's another 3 damage. And another, like, this thing can deal anywhere between 6 and 9, 12 damage for you over the course of the game sometimes, and it too is crazy in multiples. I've talked about a few creatures like that in this deck. This is yet another one of them. You know, following up Sovereign with Sovereign is a 12-point live swing and 2 super fat flying bodies too. So this thing has actually been crazy in playtesting, and would not surprise me if it was able to break through at some point in its standard life cycle. But we're also going to play some spells in this deck. Seems appropriate. So we're going to start with 2 copies of Sovereign's Bite in here. A card that some people are going to be like, why not 4 copies? And then some people are wise to it, and they're going to be like, why are you playing this card at all? I'll be honest, full disclosure, this is the worst card in the deck. And some people are going to be like, why is that? So let me tell you, this doesn't affect the board in any way, or really the game state in any meaningful way either. You know, you did 3, you gained 3, but nothing else really happened, you know. You didn't take out a creature, you didn't, you know, put a body on the battlefield, and most of the time, you would want an effect like this, but you want to put a body on the battlefield or take a body away from the battlefield. This doesn't do either of those things, so it's kind of bad, but any burn player will tell you that there have been many games where all you have to do to finish off the game is draw a lightning bolt or a lightning strike because your opponent's at 2 or 3. And in those situations, this card is very good. And on top of that, even the life gain is important for at least 1 card that we're playing, so all that factors into it. At the end of the day, I didn't think this was worth a playset. I definitely thought there were better ways to spend this slot, but mostly for thematic purposes, I felt like it belonged in the deck. It literally does what the deck is trying to do, but I just didn't think it was worth a full playset. We're also going to play 3 copies of Arterial Flow, because it turns out that Mind Rot is really good. You know, who would have thunk? But against control players, this is awesome. They're going to want to be holding cards in their hand all game. So it's just about always relevant against them. And it's even decent against aggro, where often, especially if you're on the draw, they're going to be down to their last couple of cards anyway. And you're just like, discard your Hazoret, Rekindling Phoenix, you know. So that's always pretty good. Actually, Mind Rot is not bad against just about any deck in the format right this second. But we also get the added advantage of burning the opponent if we have a vampire, gaining a little bit of life back. And this is obviously a sweet combo with Fell Spectre as long as you have a vampire out. Now we're going to play 4 copies of Chainer's Torment in this deck, and I have not exactly spoken highly of this card in the past, but in this deck, it's our finishing move, you know. This is going to deal 4 points of damage for us over a couple of turns, gain us a little bit of life back, and get us a huge dude, which does cost us some life. But you may have noticed all the incremental life gain in the deck. Nearly 20 cards in this deck gain us some life. So in some cases, we'll still be over our starting life total whenever we actually get that demon, and we'll just have a huge, like, 10 power or more guy out. It may have hit us for a bunch of damage, but we can take the hit at that point in the game, especially if it means getting a game-ending creature. And this is another card that's pretty decent in multiples. You know, Chainer's Torment into Chainer's Torment won't affect the board for a couple of turns, but it will buy you some time by gaining you some life until you make the demons, and it'll end up doing like 8 points of damage for you, which is nearly finishing levels of damage, you know. So Chainer's Torment probably doesn't belong in any other deck, but this is the deck for it. In a way, this is kind of a Chainer's Torment deck, you know. This is close to the top of our curve. It deals the most damage on one card for us in the deck, and it gives us the biggest creature in the deck. So the deck feels built around Chainer's Torment, and I wouldn't put it in anything else, but it definitely goes in this. And we'll finish off the deck with some removal here that's really cheap, but also pretty premium. You know, we're going to play 3 copies of Walk the Plank and 2 copies of Murder, because these are both just good, clean, fair removal spells that come at a decent rate. You know, 2 mana for Walk the Plank is great, because it's going to kill just about any relevant creature in the entire format. That's worth your 2 mana. And Murder might cost 1 more, but it's going to be worth it to kill creatures at instant speed some of the time, too. Now, the deck plays 24 lands in its current state. It could use 25, maybe. You know, we got 4 5-drops and a bunch of 4-drops in the deck, so I could see putting a 25th land, but this has been working for me in Arena so far. And the Memorial to Follies are especially important to point out. These are really, really good because they can get back a Vampire Sovereign, put it back on top of your library, or even a Fell Spectre. That can be nice to return sometimes too. Often in the late game, you're just looking for reach. You know, I discussed that when we talked about Sovereign's Bite. You can just get that last 2-3 points of damage in, you can win the game. And a Memorial to Folly can put a Vampire Sovereign back on top and help you do just that. So that can be super important in the late game. As it stands, though, you could probably, if you had a couple extra bucks, zhuzh this up with some colorless lands, you know, Arch of Araska, Field of Ruins, Alfiran Void, whatever you fancy, you could put in here. But as it stands, we've got 24 black sources and a couple of interesting spell lands, and it's been working out for me. Now here's the sideboard. Most of this explains itself, but there are a couple of interesting inclusions I feel like I should point out. But Raider's Wake is one of my favorite sideboard cards. This comes in against control because between it and Fell Spectre, we can end up making them discard a bunch of cards and taking a bunch of damage. This thing is just crazy to have in the same deck with Fell Spectre, and after boards, we get a lot more dedicated with our discard plan because you also see the 4th copy of Arterial Flow and the 3 copies of Duress against control and combo. So we can really attack their hand post boards while still attacking with creatures, which makes Raider's Wake really, really good. We've also got Settle the Score in there. This is against Hazoret and Ronus and Scarab God, which we won't have to worry about post-rotation. But we will still have to worry about Rekindling Phoenix, and we also hate that creature. So Settle the Score is probably not an ideal inclusion here, but as far as budget goes, it's a lot better than having to play Vraska's Contempt, which you could play if you had the copies or the dollars. But Settle the Score is a pretty decent, 5 cents sideboard option to deal with problem creatures that we know we're going to run up against. And finally, the Golden Demiser in there against aggro, because aggro can sometimes be really, really good against us. Even though we gain a bunch of life, we throw a bunch of creatures in their way, they have a pretty decent top end, especially after boards, and cards like Hazoret and Rekindling Phoenix are very good against us. So we need to shore up that matchup a little bit, and being able to blow away most of their creature base is a pretty decent way of doing that. We can focus our blocks on their bigger stuff if we need to in that case. Plus, Golden Demise plays pretty well with Tattered Mummy. It kills Mummy, but at least it deals 2 damage to their face. It's a way to get our own Tattered Mummy off the battlefield if we need to, so at least there's that. Plus, Vampire Neonate, Fell Spectre, they both survived this, as does Vampire Sovereign. So we've got a fair amount of creatures that can be on the board and still survive against a Golden Demise. And what's better, just one more thing, sometimes we will get the City's Blessing just because we have enough lands and a couple of random creatures out. And in that case, this can come down, kill a few guys, and let us get through, stalemates and board stalls and stuff. So I like a lot about Golden Demise, at least 3 copies of this in the board. And here are your power rankings. A final score of 59 points, which is actually pretty good, all things considered. If you've been following the channel, you probably haven't seen a 59 in a while. Like, we haven't seen something go under 60 in a good long time. But for a $5 deck, this is really good. I've made a bunch of $5 decks in the past, and they're usually mid-50s. But this is very close to 60 because it does a lot of things pretty well. We're resilient because we can just draw burn for the kill. We can draw life gain to stay in the game if we need to. A lot of those cards are one and the same, so we're somewhat resilient. We've got some decent clean removal in the deck that makes our defense at least passable. We've got a fair amount of bodies in the deck that makes our offense okay. We're fairly versatile because we can either block when we need to, attack when we need to, and again, we've got decent removal for getting rid of important threats and getting through attacks or blocking the threats that do matter. So we're a relatively versatile deck too. And all of that adds up to a deck that actually does a lot of things really well, even despite the extremely low price tag. And again, can pull off wins. I've been winning games on Arena with this thing, and if you want to play it in real life, it's $5, but if you want to play it on Arena, it's just a bunch of random common and uncommon wild cards that you've managed to collect up to this point. So it's actually a pretty fun deck to play, whether in real life, which I have played a bunch of games real life with it, so I like it that much on Arena, or whether you're playing it on Arena. This is great for Brewer's Delight, so give this thing a shot. It's not going to cost you too much, and it'll last forever. It's not going to rotate in a couple of months, so you won't have to replace anything. And as far as fun F&M level or even just casual level decks, you can do a lot worse than this. It's a lot of fun to play with, and it's a lot of fun to challenge yourself to get to 20 damage with it. I'll say this one more time. Every little bit of damage counts in this deck. I really want to hammer that home. 3rd time's a charm. I think it's the 3rd time I've said it. But that's how many times you're supposed to say something to really push it into somebody's brain. So there's no mistake. There's a reason I'm saying it so many times. Every little bit of damage in this deck counts. Because even if you get the best possible curve, Vicious Conquistador gets an attack step in on turn 2. You play your Tattered Mummy, it dies in combat. Skymarch Bloodletter comes down. Into Fell Spectre, into Vampire Sovereign. You get the perfect curve all the way up to turn 5. That's half their life total. You still have to do the other half of their life total worth of damage for them. And you can. You'll top deck Sovereign's Bites and Chainer's Torments. You'll get in a couple of attack steps worth of damage with your Vampire Sovereign. You can finish them off. I'm not saying you can't, but just keep in mind that every one little point of damage counts an awful lot in this deck. So give this thing a shot. It costs lunch. You could buy a Subway sandwich, or you could buy this deck. And I'm not saying you skip lunch or anything, but it's worth it for a bunch of cardboard you can play with for a really, really, really long time and get a lot of fun out of. So if you're interested in trying this thing out, click the very first link in the description box below me, and that'll take you over to my friends at TCG Player. They're good folks. They help sponsor my content, but they're also where you can get this deck for this cheap. Most places you're not going to spend more than $10 on this deck, but why overpay for any deck? Go to TCG Player, check the link, and get the deck for under $5 right now. And it helps me out just when you click the link, so if you want to help your brother out, do that. Other ways you can help your boy out are just by clicking like on the video if you enjoyed the content. I would appreciate that. Helps me a lot. You can also share the video, whether you do it to Facebook, Twitter, Insta, poop, I don't care what you do, just share the video. That helps me more than you can ever imagine, just by getting the word out and spreading it around the interwebs. So share the video if you have the time, and subscribe if you're new or if you haven't done it yet. We're trying to get to 100,000, and we're super close. I want that stupid play button, so help me get there. Subscribe if you haven't done it yet. But I'm pretty sure I'm tapped out, so on your way out, do the rest of the stuff. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev, and if you've got a buck that you can spare just once a month, throw it into the Patreon. That helps me out a freaking lot. It allows me to keep doing this for a living and keep bringing you decks and concentrating on this and doing what I love and making something that I am happy to have made with my life and making people happy and stuff, it means a lot to me, and the only reason I can do it is because people donate to the Patreon. So if you want to be one of those amazing people, then do it. That would be awesome. And if you already are one of those amazing people, you, sir or madam, are amazing and keep being amazing. You help more than you even understand. So if you want to check out the Patreon, click the link in the description. That'll take you right over there, which is pretty convenient. But in any case, I'm pretty sure that's all I got for this one, so I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.